The kingdom of Lurea floated like a jewel between two silver moons. Its towers touched the clouds, and its gardens glowed with strange blue flowers that sang at night. The people of Lurea were proud of their knowledge. Every child could speak 10 languages before they turned 10 years old. Their words were like music, and silence was seen as a curse. But in the highest tower of the Crystal Palace lived Princess Vireen, the only daughter of King Althar and Queen Lyria. She had never spoken a single word since birth. Many believed she was blessed by the gods. Others whispered that she was cursed. Her eyes were bright like starlight, her silver hair shimmered in sunlight, yet she had no voice. She only watched the world from her balcony, quiet as the moon, while her parents tried everything to help her speak. For 12 years, 50 royal tutors had tried to teach her. Some used ancient scrolls, some used sound crystals, some even tried magic from the old worlds. But every one of them failed. The king grew tired. The queen cried in secret, and the palace that was once filled with laughter now echoed only with disappointment. One evening, as the red sun sank behind the twin moons, a small cleaning robot rolled through the royal corridors, followed by a man in plain gray clothes. His name was Ethan, a human janitor from Earth. Humans were new to the galaxy, guests among hundreds of alien races. Most saw them as weak, simple, or emotional. Ethan didn't care what others thought. He had taken this job because he wanted to see other worlds and send money back home to his little sister. He worked quietly, sweeping marble halls, cleaning stained windows, fixing broken pipes in rooms far too beautiful for someone like him. Nobody noticed him. He liked it that way. But that night, while mopping the long glass corridor that led to the princess's chamber, he heard something strange, a faint sound. Not a word, not a cry, just a soft, trembling breath like someone trying not to cry. Ethan looked around. Behind the crystal doors, he saw the princess sitting alone on the floor. The moonlight fell through the glass, covering her in silver glow. Her lips moved, no sound came out. Her hands were shaking. She looked like a child trapped in her own silence. Ethan froze. He wasn't supposed to be there. No servant was allowed near the royal chambers without permission. But his heart wouldn't let him walk away. He quietly stepped closer and picked up a small music crystal that had fallen near her. It was cracked. Maybe that was why she was crying. He held it up and smiled softly. "It's broken," he whispered, even though she couldn't understand his words. "But I can fix broken things." The princess lifted her head. Her silver eyes met his, wide, surprised, almost frightened. No one ever spoke directly to her, not even the tutors, without bowing first. Yet this human stood there, holding the broken crystal like it was something alive. Ethan kneeled and placed it on the floor between them. Then he took out a small cleaning light and began working. The princess watched in silence, curious. After a few minutes, he managed to make the light crystal glow again, dimly, but enough to fill the room with a warm golden shimmer. He grinned proudly, like a child showing off a small trick. The princess blinked, then smiled. A small, shy smile, her first in years. Ethan didn't know the history, didn't know the curse. He only saw a lonely girl who needed a smile. He touched his chest and pointed at her as if to say, "See? Fixed." Then he gave a small wave and left quietly. The next morning, the palace buzzed with whispers. The princess smiled last night. She showed emotion. Someone saw her. How? Who was it? The guards checked the logs and found only one person near her room, the human janitor. Some were angry. How dare a low worker approach the royal blood? Others were curious. What did he do that the royal tutors couldn't? The king didn't believe it. "A janitor?" he said in disbelief. "You expect me to believe a man who scrubs floors achieved what 50 scholars could not?" Yet deep in his heart, he wanted it to be true. That night, Ethan was called to the royal hall. He stood before the throne, nervous, his uniform still smelling of soap and polish. The king's voice boomed. "Human, did you enter my daughter's chamber without command?" Ethan swallowed hard. I didn't mean to, Your Majesty. I only fixed what was broken." The queen leaned forward. "And what did you fix, human?" Ethan looked up slowly. "Her light, my queen," he said quietly. The light in her eyes. The court fell silent. As Ethan was escorted out, the princess appeared behind the glass balcony above. She looked down at him. The same human who dared to smile at her, not as a princess but as a person, and for the first time in her life, she raised her hand and waved. The entire court gasped. The princess of the mute, untouchable air had responded to someone. The king stood frozen. The queen covered her mouth, tears forming in her eyes. From that day onward, whispers began across the kingdom. The human touched the princess's heart. The silent one has awakened. The age of miracles has begun. The next morning, the crystal palace buzzed with quiet tension. Servants whispered in corners. Guards tried to look serious, but even they were curious. Everyone had heard the same rumor. The mute princess smiled and waved at the human janitor. The king sat in the royal council chamber, tapping his fingers on the armrest. "Bring the human," he said finally. Moments later, Ethan stood before the throne again, his gray uniform freshly washed, his mop still leaning against the wall outside. He looked nervous but calm. King Althar studied him for a long time. "You made my daughter smile," the king said slowly. "No one has done that in 10 years. I do not understand how." Ethan lowered his head. "I didn't mean to do anything special, Your Majesty. I just fixed something." The queen leaned forward gently. "Would you try again?" Ethan blinked. "Try again?" "With her," the queen said. "Under our watch. If she smiles once more, perhaps the gods favor you." Ethan hesitated. He was just a janitor, not a teacher. But the look in the queen's eyes wasn't royal command, it was a mother's hope. He nodded quietly. "I'll do my best." The next afternoon, they brought Princess Vireen to the sunlight room, a vast chamber filled with golden glass and flowers that moved with the breeze. The king, queen, and several tutors sat behind a hidden screen to observe. Ethan walked in, clutching a small bag he had made the night before. Inside were old gloves, some cloth pieces, and bits of thread. The princess sat on a white chair, her eyes calm but distant. She looked at him, curious yet cautious. Ethan smiled softly. "Hi again," he said, knowing she didn't understand his words. He pointed at himself. "Ethan." Then he pointed at her and raised his eyebrows like a question. She tilted her head but didn't answer. So he laughed lightly and pretended to think hard. Then, using both hands, he drew a crown in the air above his head and bowed dramatically. The princess blinked, then gave a small, amused exhale through her nose. Almost a laugh. Encouraged, Ethan reached into his bag. "Okay, let's see if this works," he muttered. He slipped one glove on and used colored cloth pieces to make tiny finger puppets. One looked like a star, another like a moon. The last one was a tiny stick figure with a circle face, meant to be her. He held them up and began to act out a small story. The star puppet danced across his fingers, twinkling and jumping, but it looked lonely. The moon puppet tried to speak to it, but no sound came out. So the star used light. It shined brighter until the moon smiled. Ethan mimed the moon's smile, moving his eyebrows and lips like a clown. His expressions were exaggerated, funny, and human in a way the princess had never seen. Slowly, Vireen's lips curved again. She giggled, a tiny sound that surprised even herself. Ethan's eyes widened in joy. He quickly placed the stick figure puppet next to the star and moon. The three friends waved at each other, then hugged. The princess covered her mouth with her hand, laughing soundlessly. Behind the hidden screen, the king and queen exchanged stunned glances. Even the tutors leaned forward, unable to believe what they saw. Ethan finished the story by pretending the puppet said goodbye. Then he placed the glove on the floor and gently pushed it toward her. The princess looked down. For a moment, she didn't move. Then shyly, she reached out and touched the small puppet with her finger. She lifted it carefully as if it were something precious. She held it up and pointed at the tiny puppet that represented her. Then she pointed at Ethan. He smiled and nodded. "Yes," he said softly, pointing to himself. "Me," then he pointed to her puppet. "You," she blinked, understanding something. She pointed to herself and whispered, almost too softly to hear. Vireen." Ethan froze. Did she just? Behind the screen, the queen gasped, covering her mouth. The king stood up halfway, disbelief and hope fighting in his chest. It wasn't a full word, not clear, not strong, but it was the first sound she had ever made with meaning. Ethan smiled, his eyes warm. He didn't cheer or make a scene. He just nodded and said softly, "Beautiful." After the session, the king called Ethan privately. "You did something today," the king said slowly, voice trembling slightly. "I don't yet know what or how, but you reached her. Tell me, what did you teach?" Ethan looked down at his hands. "Nothing, Your Majesty. I just told her a story." The king frowned. "A story? That's not teaching." Ethan looked up and smiled gently. "Maybe not for us, sir, but maybe for her it is." The king said nothing more, but when Ethan left, he whispered to his wife, "Perhaps wisdom does not always wear a crown." Later that night, in her golden chamber, Princess Vireen sat by the window. The moonlight touched the tiny glove puppet still on her hand. She whispered again, practicing. Vireen." The sound was small, broken, but real. Outside her door, Ethan walked by quietly, pushing his cleaning cart. He paused when he heard her voice and that small miracle of sound. He smiled to himself and whispered, "Good job, Princess." Then he continued cleaning the hall, leaving behind the faint echo of hope. The next morning, the palace woke to the most unbelievable news. The mute princess had spoken a word. Just one word, but it was enough to shake the entire kingdom. The queen wept with joy. The king ordered bells to ring across the towers and servants whispered, "The curse is ending." But not everyone was happy. The royal tutors, who had spent years failing, stood in silence. Their pride burned. A human janitor, a simple cleaner, had done what they could not. In the royal hall, King Althar called for Ethan once more. The human walked in nervously, still wearing his plain uniform. His boots squeaked on the polished floor as he bowed awkwardly. The king's voice was firm but kind. "Ethan of Earth," he said, "you did something none of my scholars could. From this day, you will continue teaching my daughter. You will have 1 hour each day in the sunlight room. You will teach her however you wish." Ethan looked shocked. "Me, teacher? But I'm not a teacher, Your Majesty." The queen smiled softly. "You already are." "You taught her to smile." The king nodded. "Do not fail her, human. She is our only hope." Ethan bowed again. "I'll do my best, Your Majesty." That afternoon he met Princess Vireen again in the sunlight room. The air smelled of flowers and glowing vines. Sunlight danced on the marble floor. The princess was already there, sitting quietly, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She had the tiny glove puppet beside her. When Ethan entered, she looked up and then smiled. He smiled back. "Hey, student," he said playfully. Then he picked up another glove and began preparing his puppets. Today he made 3 new ones, a sun, a small bird, and a tiny figure of a human. He set them on his fingers and began his story. The bird couldn't fly, he explained softly using gestures, but it wanted to see the sun. He mimed the bird flapping, failing, falling, then standing up again. The princess watched closely, her silver eyes following every move. Ethan then made the bird puppet look sad. He pointed at the sun and shook his head. "No wings," he said, showing the bird's empty sides. Then he lifted his human puppet, made it hold the bird, and raised both toward the sun. The princess gasped softly. She understood the meaning, help. Ethan saw the spark in her eyes and nodded. "Yes," he said clearly, pointing at her and then himself. "Help. You help me, I help you." He repeated the word slowly. "Help." The princess blinked, hesitated, then whispered, "He." LP Ethan's smile grew wide. "Perfect." From that day onward, every lesson was different. Ethan never used books or magic or formal signs. He used play, gestures, smiles, laughter, and his simple human stories. One day he made her learn thank you by acting out a scene with 2 puppets giving each other bread. Another day he made her learn light by switching lamps on and off, making her giggle each time. Slowly, the princess began forming sounds, soft, shaky, but full of heart. She was not learning like others. She was remembering how to express herself, but not everyone approved. Behind the curtains, the royal tutors watched with narrow eyes. "This is foolishness," one hissed. "He mocks our tradition," another said. "A janitor teaching a princess with toys? Disgraceful." They complained to the high advisor, who agreed to bring the matter to the king. That evening, during dinner, the king listened to their arguments in silence. Finally, he spoke. "You all had 10 years, he said quietly. He had 3 days. "Who is the fool here?" The tutors bowed their heads, but their jealousy did not fade. They began whispering plans to discredit Ethan. Meanwhile, the lessons continued to bloom. Ethan taught her to draw letters using soap bubbles on glass. He drew shapes on the misted windows, A, B, C, and she copied them with a smile. Sometimes he told her about Earth, about rain, trees, and oceans. She listened with wide eyes, fascinated by the idea of a world so far away yet filled with simple joys. One day, as he cleaned the marble floor, she sat beside him and tried to say something. Her voice trembled, but she managed to whisper, "Eth," and he froze. She had just spoken his name. His eyes softened and he laughed with pure joy. "That's me," he said, pointing to himself. "Ethan," the princess smiled proudly, repeating, "Ethan." It was the most beautiful sound he had ever heard. That night, the queen visited her daughter's room. "My child," she said gently, brushing Vireen's silver hair. "Your voice is beautiful." The princess looked down shyly, then held up a small puppet. And the queen smiled through tears. "Yes, my dear. The human helped you. Never forget kindness." Outside the room, Ethan finished cleaning the corridor. He heard faint laughter inside, and it made his heart warm. He didn't realize that. Far away in the palace library, the angry tutors were already plotting to get rid of him. Rain poured over the crystal towers of the palace like liquid silver. The usual music of the gardens was gone. The flowers closed their petals and the glowing vines dimmed. The storm was heavy. Thunder rolled across the sky and the wind howled through the marble halls. The guards ran to secure the gates, but Ethan stayed behind to clean a leaking corridor near the royal garden. He worked quietly, humming an old Earth song. When he turned a corner, he found Princess Vireen sitting by the glass wall of the sky garden, staring at the storm. Her hands were pressed against the glass, watching the lightning crackle outside. He blinked, surprised. "Your Highness? You shouldn't be here." "It's dangerous." Of course, she didn't answer. She only looked at him, her eyes deep and sad. Then she pointed outside, at the dark sky where the rain looked like falling stars. Ethan sighed softly and walked closer. "Yeah, storms can be scary," he said gently, "but also beautiful." She tilted her head, not understanding the words but sensing his calm tone. The power flickered. For a moment the lights went out, leaving only the stormlight shining through the glass. Thunder rumbled again, loud and close. The princess jumped slightly and covered her ears. Ethan quickly knelt beside her. "It's okay," he whispered. "Just sound. It can't hurt you." She looked at him, trembling, and suddenly her lips moved, as if she wanted to speak. Her throat tightened, but no sound came out. Frustration filled her face. She hit her chest with her fist, shaking her head again and again. Ethan's heart ached. Hey, don't do that," he said softly. "You're trying, that's what matters." Tears formed in her eyes. She opened her mouth again, forcing herself to make a sound, but only a broken breath escaped. She turned away and hid her face. Ethan took a deep breath and looked into his small cleaning bag. He pulled out one of his finger puppets, the one shaped like a bird. Its colors were faded now, but the smile on its little cloth face remained. He placed it on his finger and made it flap its wings clumsily. "This little bird," he said softly, "forgot how to sing." The princess looked up through her tears. Ethan continued, moving the puppet slowly. Every time it tried, the sound broke. Others laughed. So the bird stayed silent and alone. He made the puppet lower its head, then used his other hand to create a sun puppet, glowing from a small light chip inside. "But one day," Ethan said, "someone told the bird that singing isn't about being perfect. It's about being brave." He made the bird flap again, wobbling, silly, determined. So it opened its mouth and tried again, and this time it didn't care if it was wrong. He smiled at her gently. It just wanted to be heard. The princess stared at the little puppet. Then slowly she placed her trembling hand beside it. Her lips moved again, and this time a sound escaped. Soft, broken, but real. A tiny hum filled the air, shaking with emotion. Ethan froze. His eyes widened, and then a wide smile spread across his face. "That's it," he whispered. "That's your song." The hum grew clearer, warmer as she closed her eyes. The sound echoed softly across the glass walls, blending with the rain and thunder. The first true sound of her voice. Unbeknownst to them, the palace guards outside the glass corridor heard it too. They dropped their spears in shock. "Did you hear that?" "The princess, she spoke. Within minutes, the entire palace was alive with whispers again. The king and queen rushed to the garden, hearts pounding. When they arrived, they found their daughter sitting on the floor, tears on her cheeks, her hand still holding Ethan's small puppet. Ethan knelt beside her, smiling like someone who had just witnessed a miracle. She made a sound, the queen whispered, covering her mouth. It was more than that, Ethan said quietly, not daring to look up at them. It wasn't courage. The king stepped forward, his deep voice shaking slightly. You may leave now, human. You have done enough. Ethan nodded and stood, bowing politely. He knew it wasn't a dismissal of anger. It was shock, confusion, maybe even fear. He walked away slowly, leaving the princess with her parents. But as he reached the door, he heard a small, trembling whisper behind him. Ethan. He turned around. The princess's eyes met his, shining through tears and stormlight. She repeated a little louder this time. Ethan. The queen gasped. The king froze. Ethan smiled softly, his eyes misty. I'm here, he said quietly. Later that night, when the palace was calm again, Ethan stood by the balcony, watching the stars appear after the storm. He could still hear her soft voice echoing in his memory. He looked down at the tiny bird puppet in his hand. You did it, little one, he said with a chuckle. You helped her sing. And somewhere in her tower, Princess Vireen sat by her, window whispering the same soft hum again, not out of fear but joy. For the first time, her silence was no longer a prison. It was becoming a song. The morning after the storm, the crystal palace glowed under a calm blue sky. Birds returned to the gardens, and servants smiled again. For the first time in many years, laughter could be heard from the princess's chambers. Princess Vireen had spoken. Not clearly, not perfectly, but it was real. She had said a name. She had said, Ethan. But where there is light, shadows always follow. In the lower courtrooms of the palace, the royal tutors gathered in secret. Their faces were pale with anger and humiliation. This human has broken sacred law, said Master Iriel, the eldest among them. He dares to mock royal education with toys and tricks. Another hissed, the girl's voice cannot return through human magic. It must be a trick, a dangerous charm. A third tutor nodded darkly. We will go to the king. We will demand a trial. And so, they did. By noon, the entire palace knew Ethan, the human janitor, was accused of deception. The king sat on his golden throne, his face unreadable. The queen stood beside him, her eyes heavy with worry. Ethan was brought into the great hall, escorted by guards, though their hands were gentle. He didn't resist. His face was calm, though his heart raced. The king's voice echoed through the hall. Ethan of Earth, you are accused of using forbidden methods to influence the royal bloodline. The tutors claim you have enchanted my daughter. Ethan swallowed. Enchanted? No, your majesty. I don't even know how to cast a spell. The tutors shouted. Lies! His words confuse her. He uses strange earth gestures to control her mind. Ethan turned toward them. I don't control anyone, he said softly. I just told her stories. The high advisor, tall and cold, stepped forward. Stories, he said slowly. Yet she speaks your name. Not her father's. Not her mother's. Yours. That is not normal. The queen's eyes filled with tears, but she stayed silent. Ethan bowed his head. If caring for her is a crime, then I am guilty. The king raised his hand for silence. Enough. He looked down at Ethan, his expression softening slightly. You have done great things, human, but the law of Lurea is old. No commoner, especially not an outsider, may touch the royal heart. He paused, voice trembling. Yet I cannot ignore what I have seen. He looked at his daughter sitting quietly in the royal box above. She smiles now. She speaks. Because of you. Then he stood, tall and regal. Tomorrow at dawn you will face a final test. If she can speak one clear word before the court, proving her gift is real, you shall go free. If not, He hesitated. You will be exiled from the kingdom. Gasps filled the hall. Ethan bowed slowly. Understood, Your Majesty. He was taken to the dungeon chambers, though no chains were placed on him. The guards, silent and respectful, gave him food and light. That night he couldn't sleep. He sat on the floor staring at his small puppet bag. He whispered to himself, I can't help her anymore. It's up to her now. Meanwhile, in her room, Princess Vireen couldn't stop trembling. She had heard everything. She ran to her balcony, whispering his name again and again. Ethan, Ethan. But the wind carried her voice away. She wanted to scream, but the old fear gripped her throat again. She pressed her hands against her chest, tears running down her face. Then she saw something on her table, the tiny bird puppet he had used in the garden. He had left it behind. She picked it up with both hands, shaking. Then she whispered to the little puppet, her voice cracking. Help me. Her whisper echoed softly through the moonlight. At dawn, the great hall filled again. The king sat upon his throne. The queen clutched her necklace, trying not to cry. The tutors stood tall and proud, waiting to watch the human fall. Ethan was brought in, calm but tired. His eyes met the princess's across the hall. She looked frightened, her small hands shaking as she held the bird puppet close to her heart. The king's voice was heavy. Princess Vireen, step forward. She took one slow step, then another. The hall was silent. The king said gently, My daughter, if you can speak, show us now. Let us know this gift is real. All eyes turned to her. Even the air seemed to stop. She looked at Ethan. He smiled softly and mouthed, You can do it. The princess trembled. Her lips moved. Nothing came out. She closed her eyes, fighting tears. The tutor smirked. Then suddenly, she raised the small bird puppet. She held it high right over her heart. Her voice broke the silence. Friend. It was soft, fragile, but clear. A wave of gasps filled the room. The queen cried out, covering her mouth. The king stood frozen, tears glimmering in his eyes. Ethan's heart felt like it would burst. He smiled, eyes wet, whispering, You did it. The princess smiled through tears and said again, louder this time, Friend. The king walked down from his throne, his heavy crown glinting in the morning light. He placed his hand gently on his daughter's shoulder, then turned to Ethan. You are free, human, he said softly. And more than that, you are a teacher of hope. The jealous tutors fell silent. Their pride turned to shame. Ethan bowed deeply. Thank you, Your Majesty. But I didn't teach her words. She already had them inside. I just helped her find them. That night, after the trial, the princess found Ethan by the garden. The rain had stopped, and the stars were bright again. She handed him the bird puppet and whispered one last time, smiling, Thank you. Ethan looked at her, eyes warm. No, princess. Thank you. For in her first word he had found something more powerful than magic, the courage of a heart learning to speak. The word friend echoed through the marble halls of the Crystal Palace long after the trial ended. No one could forget it. The mute princess, silent since birth, had spoken, not because of magic, not because of royal science, but because of a human janitor. By morning, the story had spread across the empire. From the golden streets of Lurea to the smallest moon outposts, people whispered in awe. The princess spoke. A human helped her. The curse is broken. Children laughed, merchants sang, and even the guards smiled as they worked. For the first time in years, the empire felt alive again. But deep inside the palace, not everyone celebrated. King Althar sat alone in the royal chamber, looking out through the glass windows. His reflection stared back, a ruler who had seen miracles, but also feared them. A human had touched the royal bloodline, changed destiny itself. What would the Council of Planets say? What would the other alien empires think? That Lurea's royal family now depended on Earth's simple cleaners? The queen entered quietly, placing her hand on his shoulder. She spoke, my love, she said softly. That is what matters. The king sighed. Yes. But if one human could change her, what will others try to change next? The queen smiled faintly. Perhaps change is not our enemy. In the garden below, Ethan sat on a stone bench surrounded by glowing flowers. He had no rank, no wealth, yet everyone who passed bowed to him now. He didn't know how to react. He looked at the small bag of finger puppets in his lap. Guess we made history, huh? He whispered to them, smiling tiredly. Suddenly, a gentle voice spoke behind him. Ethan. He turned and froze. Princess Vireen stood there without guards, wearing a simple white dress. Her silver hair glowed in the morning light. In her hands, she held the little bird puppet. She walked toward him slowly. Friend, she said, clearly this time. Ethan smiled. Yeah, he said softly. Always. She sat beside him, her movements graceful but shy. You sad? She asked, struggling with each word. He chuckled quietly. No, just thinking. She looked up, curious. Think what? He took a deep breath. That I might have to leave soon. Her expression changed, confusion, then fear. Leave? Ethan nodded. Maybe. Your father's worried. He thinks people won't understand a human and a princess being friends. The princess shook her head, eyes wide. No. You stay. Her voice trembled. Please. Ethan looked away, heart heavy. I wish I could promise that. Later that day, the king summoned him again to the throne room. The queen and the princess were already there. Ethan of Earth, said the king, his voice formal, you have given my daughter her voice. For that, Lurea owes you a debt beyond gold. Ethan bowed slightly. I didn't do it for reward, your majesty, the king continued. Still, our laws are ancient. No outsider may remain within royal walls without title or bloodline. You must choose, return to Earth or accept the offer I give you. Ethan looked up. Offer? The king nodded. I will name you Royal Teacher of Emotions. You will teach not only my daughter, but every child who has lost their way to silence. The queen smiled softly. Your stories brought light, Ethan. Let them bring light to others. Ethan hesitated. But the people, will they accept me? The king looked at his daughter who stood beside Ethan, holding the puppet tightly. They already do, he said quietly. That night, a grand ceremony filled the great hall. The princess sat beside her parents, her face calm and proud. Ethan stood before them in a simple robe of silver threads, not royal, not noble, but honored. As the lights dimmed, the king spoke. For centuries we believed wisdom came only from the powerful. But today we learn that it can also come from kindness, even from hands that clean the dust of others. The crowd bowed. Then, to everyone's surprise, the princess rose. She walked forward and faced the people. Her voice, though soft, carried through the hall. My friend, he helped me. I speak because of heart. The hall went silent. Many cried openly. The queen wiped her tears as the king placed his hand over his chest. Ethan's throat tightened. He stepped forward and knelt before her. You're stronger than you think, princess, he whispered. She smiled, her silver eyes glowing with warmth. Together, strong. The crowd erupted into cheers. That night, as the stars lit the twin moons, Ethan walked alone through the quiet halls. The queen found him on the balcony. Leaving already? She asked softly. He shook his head. No, I'll stay. For her lessons. For the others too. The queen smiled. She will miss you when you go. He looked at the stars. And I'll miss her every day. In her room, Princess Vireen placed all the puppets on her table. The bird, the star, the human, she whispered. One word for each puppet. Hope, light, friend. Then she smiled and said clearly, Ethan, and outside. The night wind carried her voice across the silver towers, a sound that would be remembered forever. Weeks passed after the ceremony, and the palace of Lurea was no longer silent. Laughter and gentle voices now filled the halls. Young servants whispered greetings to one another. Children in the royal nursery practiced their first words, and music returned to the air. At the center of it all was Princess Vireen, walking through the gardens with a bright smile and speaking slowly but confidently. Each morning she practiced with Ethan, not as a student but as a friend. She learned words like dream, sky, brave, and home. And every time she spoke, the whole palace listened. Ethan had changed too. He no longer wore his gray janitor's uniform. Instead, he wore simple white robes trimmed with silver, a gift from the king, symbolizing both humility and honor. He continued to clean when he had time, saying with a grin, "Old habits die hard." But most days, he taught children how to express feelings, through stories, drawings, and, of course, puppets. Even the old tutors who once despised him now watched his classes silently, humbled by the truth that learning wasn't about pride, it was about heart. One evening, while the sun dipped low behind the silver towers, the king invited Ethan to the royal balcony. "You've done more than anyone in this empire," the king said quietly. "My daughter speaks, my people hope again. Yet your own people wait for you on Earth. The transport ship leaves in 3 days." Ethan stared at the horizon. 3 days, he repeated softly. The king nodded. "You must choose, Ethan, to stay here as royal teacher or to return to your home." Ethan smiled faintly. "Home," he whispered. "Maybe home isn't one place anymore." That night, Ethan visited the princess's chamber. She was painting stars on a long piece of crystal glass, humming softly, her own little song. When she saw him, she smiled brightly. "Ethan," she said clearly. "Come see?" He walked closer. The glass painting showed 3 things: a human, a princess, and a bird flying into a golden sun. "It's beautiful," Ethan said. "You're getting really good," she grinned proudly. Then her smile faded as she noticed his quiet tone. "You go?" she asked hesitantly. Ethan sighed. "Maybe. The ship leaves soon." Her eyes widened and she shook her head quickly. "No, you stay. You teach me more." He knelt beside her and smiled gently. "You don't need me to teach you anymore, princess. You already found your voice." Tears shimmered in her silver eyes. "But friend?" Ethan nodded. "Always your friend." He reached into his pocket and took out something small, a new puppet. It was shaped like a star, golden and shining softly with a small light crystal inside. He placed it in her hand. "This one," he said softly, "doesn't talk. It only shines." She looked down at it, confused. "Why?" Ethan smiled. "Because some hearts don't need words to speak, they just glow." The princess pressed the puppet to her chest and whispered, "Glow." Ethan chuckled. "Yes, glow. Like you." 3 days later, the transport ship stood ready at the skyport. The queen came to see him off, tears in her eyes. "You will always have a home here, Ethan." The king shook his hand firmly. "You reminded us that even in silence there is wisdom." Ethan bowed deeply. "Thank you, your majesties, for trusting a janitor with a miracle." When he turned toward the ship, he saw Princess Vireen standing there, holding the glowing star puppet in her hands. She ran to him, for the first time ever, without guards or fear, and threw her arms around him. The whole court froze, watching in silence. The human knelt down and hugged her back gently. "Goodbye, little star," he whispered. She shook her head. "Not goodbye. See ya." Again, he smiled. "You've learned the best word yet." As the ship lifted into the bright sky, the princess stood on the balcony holding the puppet high. The little starlight blinked with every heartbeat as if it carried a message only she could hear. She whispered softly, "Thank you, Ethan, for my voice and my heart." And far above in the departing ship, Ethan looked down at the palace, glowing like a lantern in the clouds, and whispered back, "Thank you, princess, for teaching me what words can't." Moral message, end of story. Sometimes wisdom doesn't come from those who know many words, but from those who help others find their own. True voice doesn't need power, magic, or royal blood. It only needs kindness, courage, and the will to listen.